Perfect. Thank you very much. Good morning. It's a pleasure to join all of you virtually in Almaty. I join you today from Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. As was said before, I'm one of the authors of the UNESCO Global Report. And today I would like to share with you some highlights from the UNESCO Global Report, Reshaping Policies for Creativity, Addressing Culture as a Public Good. As you all know, this report was released this February, and it provides a global overview of the cultural and creative sectors in 10 chapters. The global report is extremely important for us all because it offers a bird's eye view of and much needed data on the current state of the cultural and creative industries worldwide. It maps positive developments, highlights challenges, and makes recommendations for long-term policy making. In doing so, the global report offers us an invaluable guide to support informed policy making, not only in arts and culture, but for sustainable development as a whole, particularly at a time when we are working to recover from the devastating impact of COVID-19 and build back better. While it offers us global trends, it does as well to be reminded that the global report comes to us in a very specific context, which is the implementation of the 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. The 2005 Convention, as all of you are well aware, is an international legal agreement which is currently being ratified by 150 countries and the European Union. Over the last 17 years, the convention has supported the creative economy by ensuring that artists, cultural professionals, and citizens can create, produce, disseminate, and enjoy diverse cultural goods and services wherever they are in the world. To achieve this aim, the convention works with a whole range of stakeholders who make up the creative ecosystem. And when we say creative ecosystem, we mean diverse ministries at the national level, and not only the ones in charge of culture, as well as local governments, artists, cultural professionals, civil society organizations, trade unions, media, and universities. Therefore, in short, we can say that at the heart of the convention is the mission to bring the creative ecosystem together and to support it. Now, let us find out what story this first post-COVID global report tells us about the state of creative ecosystems and about policies enabling creativity worldwide. As you will see on the screen, it is a mixed bag of good and not so good news. On the positive side, the report finds that the global arts and culture sectors are the youngest, fastest growing sectors of the economy across the world, accounting for 3% of the global gross domestic product and about 6% of all jobs worldwide. In 2019, exports of cultural goods and services had doubled in value from 2005 to reach about $389 billion in value. But on the flip side, the report has also revealed that the cultural and creative sectors are among the most vulnerable sectors of our economies. Why so, you may ask? For one, because public investment in culture has been declining over the last 10 years. Further, working conditions are getting more precarious and dangerous for artists, as fair and sustainable pay remain distant dreams, while safe spaces for free expression continue to shrink at an alarming rate. These trends on global creativity, which I have just outlined, cover the period 2018 to 2021, half of which you will all surely remember we spent under the very dark shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic. As expected then, the report finds that the pandemic has been a particularly difficult time for the sector, with over 10 million jobs lost in 2020 alone. as international tours were cancelled and cultural venues shut their doors for public health reasons. There is another ironic reality about global attitudes to arts and culture that has emerged from our fragile, uncertain COVID times. As we all know, large numbers of people around the world who were cut off from family, friends, and colleagues and forced to stay indoors for much of the pandemic turned to arts and culture to keep themselves entertained, comforted, and distracted in turns. We have all, I'm sure, watched copious amounts of Netflix and many other streaming channels over the last 2.5 years, enjoying the work of writers, actors, musicians, directors, and producers, among others. But as this UNESCO report finds, even as people are consuming ever more cultural content online, the creators of that very same content are still struggling to make their ends meet and are feeling ever more precarious with each passing day. This leads us to what has been called the paradox effect. This basic paradox whereby the meanings of cultural expressions were intensified post-COVID, yet those who produce arts and culture were finding their work increasingly difficult, has been very strongly highlighted by the UN Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights, Ms. Karima Benu, in her report to the United Nations. Even though we have all recognized the importance of culture in people's lives in recent years, whether as enjoyment, as personal well-being, as a form of self-expression, or as a catalyst for social cohesion, this has fallen well short of translating into sustainable income for artists and for creators. As a result, many cultural professionals are taking jobs in other sectors, and a massive talent drain is well underway. Even in countries with social security schemes for the largely freelance and self-employed individuals in this sector, a significant proportion were found to be ineligible for any benefits. All these findings turn the spotlight not only on fair pay, but also on the challenges of digital, the imbalances in the flow of cultural goods and services, and the rather unclear or low socioeconomic status of artists and cultural professionals, particularly in developing countries. So in this presentation, it is the progress, the challenges, the recommendations around these 4 key areas that I would like to turn the spotlight on, because collectively, they tell a very powerful story of the state of the cultural and creative sectors worldwide, where over the last 4 years, we seem to have taken 1 step forward, but also 2 steps backward. Let us begin by taking a closer look at fair pay and the status of the artist and cultural professional. The report tells us that states are indeed putting in place measures to ensure fair pay, safe working conditions, and access to social welfare benefits for artists, bringing them in line with the general workforce, including during the COVID-19 emergency. But such efforts have not been uniform, and a significant proportion of cultural workers have been found to be ineligible for benefits or have been exposed to censorship and other attacks on their expression. Many countries also report strategies nowadays to harness the economic potential of the cultural and creative industries. But even here, more coordinated policy work needs to be done in this area to truly benefit artists. The voice of the artist also remains weak in policy processes, owing mainly to insufficient financial resources and scarce opportunities available to civil society. In this context, the global report recommends urgent policy interventions to improve the status of the artist, to ensure transversal collaborations among various ministries within a government so that we can have a whole of government approach, and also between the cultural and other sectors, and between the public and private sectors. It also calls for a guarantee for fair pay and better social protections for artists and cultural workers. As is in evidence in South Korea, where artists who have been contracted to work within the cultural sector have now become eligible for unemployment benefits of around 60% of the average monthly income in Korea. And now, let us turn to the issue of gender equality, which is increasingly being recognized as a priority by the high percentage of parties to the 2005 Convention, reporting measures to ensure gender equality in the sector. Civil society organizations, it seems, are also proving to be particularly key in stimulating networking and building capacities. Compared to music, publishing, and the performing arts, the report finds that the film industry seems to be playing a leading role in general in advocating and benefiting from gender equality measures. Globally speaking, more women are also heading up national arts or cultural councils. But when we look closer at industries, even like film, which seem to be doing rather well, we notice some glaring omissions. For example, only a third of the awards for the main film categories of 60 major film festivals worldwide were given to female artists or producers in 2019. So we can safely say that much work remains to be done. Women remain underrepresented in positions of leadership. They have less access to public funding, and their work is far less visible and acknowledged than their male counterparts. They also seem to have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, and data regarding women in culture and media sectors is still often conspicuous by its absence. So predictably, acting for gender equality remains a key recommendation of this global report, whether through affirmative action in recruitment, promotion, funding, and awards, or through continuous data monitoring, or the adoption and strengthening of enforceable legislation for the promotion of gender equality. A case in point is the gender equality policy of the Finnish Ministry of Education and Culture, which embarked on reform in the light of the Me Too movement and has now introduced guidelines for inclusion for promoting gender equality and non-discrimination at the operational level. Gender equality clauses have now been included in all the operational grants of the ministry, stipulating that all beneficiaries must promote gender equality in their operations and also report on it. Let's turn now to culture in the digital environment, which we have already seen is that the online activity is growing exponentially. For example, as we saw in an earlier slide on global trends, about 62% of total music revenues in 2020 actually came from streaming. And to support this accelerated change, most countries which are party to the 2005 Convention have set up policies aimed at digital transformation of cultural institutions and of the cultural sector at large. But the scenario is nowhere near ideal, and there exists an increasingly apparent multifaceted digital divide for a variety of reasons, due to an imbalanced landscape of platforms and algorithms, as well as because of the lack of internet access, digital literacy, and net neutrality. More action is also needed to ensure that a diverse range of actors, especially in terms of size, geographical location, and gender, can participate in the digital creative economy. National digital strategies often fail to address specific concerns and needs of the cultural creative sectors. And very worryingly, within the digital economy, the major distributors of cultural content are also funding the production of some of this content. This means that they have a direct impact on the promotion of cultural expressions, while the operations of these large companies are not subject to many regulations. Given all these realities, the global report reiterates the need for more intersectoral governance models involving ministries of culture, media, broadcasting, trade, and industry, or those responsible for copyright regulations, as well as of private actors, civil society, and other relevant agents. Investments in digital literacy, which we were talking about just now in the previous presentation, as well as discoverable local content have also been strongly emphasized. And there is a call for new and fair business models, given that artists have had to rely much more heavily on streaming since the pandemic began, and this option simply does not provide enough revenue to support a professional career. To see how easy and affordable access to the internet can positively impact the consumption of local audiovisual content, let's turn to India. In 2017, the Indian multinational Reliance Industries disrupted the domestic phone market in India by distributing its new Jio model effectively for free across rural India. The Jio effect, as it is now called, is credited with skyrocketing India to #1 for data consumption in the world as of 2018. This was largely due to increased access to music and films in local languages, raising the profile and views of Indian content. As an example, in 2019, the Indian music label and movie studio T-Series overtook the YouTube star PewDiePie in terms of subscriber numbers and views. And now let us turn to the flow of cultural goods and services, which continues to remain quite imbalanced with regard to developing countries. Although, as we have seen before, exports of cultural goods and services are surging, the participation of developing countries in the global flow of cultural goods has actually stagnated over the last 3 years. An important reason for this is that preferential treatment measures in favor of developing countries remain severely underutilized. Article 16 of the 2005 Convention, which focuses on preferential treatment for developing countries, is one of the most binding provisions of the Convention. Its implementation can help reduce inequality among countries in the field of cultural and creative industries. Yet, none of the bilateral and regional trade agreements signed between 2017 and 2020 has included a provision which falls within the scope of Article 16. Only one agreement, the Free Trade Agreement between the Republic of Korea and the Republics of Central America, contains an annex on audiovisual co-production and services, which recognizes the value of co-productions in film, animation, and broadcasting for the development of the industry, as well as for economic and cultural exchange. And even here, what we see is that the parties clearly state that the interpretation and application of this annex shall be solely in accordance with its own terms. So we see that parties to the convention are still quite reluctant to use their trade agreements to offer preferential treatment to developing countries in the cultural sector. When we look at mobility, which is the right to work internationally through temporary cross-border movement to access career opportunities, collaborators, audiences, or markets, the situation is the same. Mobility was just about beginning to be recognized as a normal part of the professional trajectory of cultural workers when the pandemic hit. As expected, visa regimes continue to be a major barrier for travel to the global north. Further, the rise of virtual mobility in the last years brings new risks, one of which is of a permanent diversion of funds set aside for travel grants and face-to-face encounters into purely digital schemes. To ensure that the flow of cultural goods and services does not remain a one-way trade, the Global Report recommends investment in aid for trade and calls on developed countries to actively grant preferential treatment to developing countries in trade agreements and with regard to mobility opportunities for artists from the global south. In light of all these findings, the global report argues that the pandemic has demonstrated that the cultural and creative sectors are deeply affected by broader social change, and that they are intrinsically bound with communities in terms of resilience, connectedness, and the well-being that they provide. And because they do so, the report calls for a strong acknowledgement in policymaking of the diversity of artistic expressions as a core asset of humanity and of culture's value as a global public good. Thank you.